Hey, everybody, welcome back to True Freedom Project. I'm your host again, Omar Kabir. How's everybody doing today? We just covered steps 1, 2, and 3, and I apologize if this is getting a little bit repetitive, but I have to say that I am not endorsed, financed by any 12-step group, or I am definitely keeping in the traditions 6, 11, and 12, and I'm only speaking for myself. These are my experiences, my interpretations, and what I've learned over the years in 12-step groups in recovery. And definitely about 30 years in and out of the rooms. And I have tried multiple fellowships. And in my opinion, they all say the same exact thing. But moving on, we're going to get into step 4 and 5 today. So step 4 is action, courage, and honesty, to tell you the truth. And if honesty, hope, and faith, steps 1, 2, and 3 are the key, then steps 4 and 5 are basically the door. It's where you enter. And I'm definitely a student of the old school. And there's a lot of cliche stuff that you're going to hear in the rooms. Some of them you don't really hear too much anymore, but times change. And one of my favorites is, if you don't do a 4-step, you're definitely going to drink a 5th, right? The classic avoidance leads straight back to the bottle. And you can't fix what you won't face, right? Denial keeps a disease alive. Half-ass measures, right? Or half measures keep us half sick. Half measures avail us nothing. A partial inventory leaves all the real patterns completely untouched. Another one of my favorites is you're only sick as your secrets, right? Hidden shame just basically fuels relapse and depression and anxiety, and you just stay stuck. And there's the truth will set you free. But first, it's going to piss you off. Honesty hurts before it heals, but it's just a fact of life. If nothing changes, nothing changes, right? Insights without action is just thinking. You're not really doing anything. Unfortunately, and fortunately at the same time, pain is the touchstone of spiritual growth. Facing yourself, especially in the state of mind and body and spirit that we come into and we get to these rooms, is uncomfortable, but it is so necessary, right? Because you can't think your way into better living, right? You live your way into better thinking. And inventory is about action and not theory, right? So steps 1, 2, and 3, it's like saying decision, and then the rest of the steps 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 are about action. There's this old story: 3 frogs are sitting on a log. One of them makes a decision to jump in. How many frogs are left on the log, right? 3, right? They just made a decision. They haven't taken any action. They haven't jumped in. They just decided, I'm going to jump in. That's another one of those old things that kind of stuck with me deep and tight. But step 4 is definitely the action, because you can't think your way sober. You can't pray yourself sober while you're still lying to yourself, right? Spirituality without honesty is just fantasy. And, the old biblical saying that faith without works is dead. And honestly, so is recovery. And yeah, I borrowed that from scripture, but it is widely used in a lot of rooms. So most of us spend our lives running from ourselves, especially addicts, alcoholics. Step 4 asks you to stop running. And step 5 asks you to speak the truth out loud. And together, they form like the hinge of where recovery stops being theoretical and it becomes real. So we're going to walk through these steps one by one, like I did in these podcasts and these next 2. Not as just like check boxes. It's not just check, I did a 4-step, check, I did a 5-step, right? It just doesn't work that way. But these are like spiritual technologies. And across AA, NA, psychology, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Stoicism, even like pagan spiritual practices in our own lived experience. So what step 4 really is, it's what I would describe as like the beginning of spiritual surgery. It's the moment when you open yourself up, you look honestly at what's been driving your life, and you begin the long, careful work of healing what's been wounded, distorted, or even misaligned. And the step reads: a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. But those words carry a depth that most people don't understand until like they're in the middle of doing a real one. And so when we say searching, we're talking about an honesty that goes deeper than just a list of mistakes. And Searching means being curious rather than punitive, which is kind of hard to do in the beginning. I understand. It does mean looking beneath the surface of your life and asking, what drove my choices? What fears shape my reactions? What beliefs shape my relationships? What stories did I tell myself to justify harm? What wounds was I protecting? Uh, where am I resentful? Right? Where am I fearful? What am I afraid of? Who did I hurt with my selfishness, with my dishonesty, with my jealousy, with my envy? Right? And one that I do look into a lot is, what was it about my false pride that made me feel better or less than other people? Because at the end of the day, addiction, alcoholism, they're diseases of avoidance. And step forward for many of us, right? It's the first time many of us stop running and turn towards the truth. So fearless doesn't mean without fear. It means you're willing to look anyway. Most people relapse, not because they're bad, but because they're blind to the patterns that keep tripping them up. And fearless basically means I'm done protecting these lies. It's the courage to face the part of yourself that you spent years avoiding. And when we say moral, it's not talking about moralism or judgment. It means examining cause and effect in your life, right? Your motives, your consequences, your patterns, your harms. And it's where you begin to see the real drivers behind your behavior: fear, self centeredness, jealousy, resentment, dishonesty, defective thinking, ego, insecurity. The list goes on and on. Because addiction didn't create these defects, right? Drinking, using it usually amplifies, warps, and then honestly, at the end of the day, it weaponizes them. And step four is where you start to see how these factors were basically driving the bus, and they were doing it without your permission. And then there's the word inventory. And this is one of the most brilliant choices in the entire program, because like the word inventory isn't emotional. It's not dramatic. And it's not like self-punishing or punitive. It's just practical. Like a store owner checking the shelves, right? You're asking what's damaged, what's missing, what's expired, what's valuable, what needs to be restocked. What do we need to throw out? And a real inventory includes both strengths and weaknesses. If you only list your defects, dude, you're not really doing an inventory. You're doing self hatred. And yeah, because, dude, we all have strengths. You have strengths. You always did. Courage, loyalty, creativity, resilience, compassion, humor, leadership, generosity. Every human being is endowed with these. And they were part of you long before the addiction ever took hold. But later in the program, and this is like really, really freaking awesome and beautiful, but you begin to see something just kind of amazing and profound. Your strengths were misused. They were misused. They were misused. They were distorted and they were weaponized by addiction, right? So like your sense of loyalty became enabling. Courage became recklessness. Uh, Sensitivity just became resentment. And intelligence became manipulation, right? You used your brain to get what you want and con people and do all kinds of nasty stuff. And yeah, independence becomes isolation, passion becomes obsession. And it's kind of funny. You realize that you weren't really broken; you were just completely misaligned. And step four is what starts to help you see the difference. And this is why a thorough inventory really matters. A shallow inventory leaves all these real drivers like untouched, and a thorough one reveals patterns, motives, fears, lies, wounds, strengths and distortions, and the truth. Right? It's not about shame; it's about clarity, and it's clarity is the beginning of freedom. If I understand and name my problems and my issues, then I can move towards resolving what is going on in my life, right? And there is no such thing as a perfect inventory either. There's steps later on where you continue to take your inventory, and when you're wrong, you promptly admit them. So just do as thorough of an inventory as you possibly can early on. um, yeah, it's The idea of the 12-step program is that you start to embody these principles eventually until they become a part of who you are. And heard many people, including myself, where I can do an inventory on the spot. Um, if you guys want to look at this from a clinical perspective, because like me and other addicts and alcoholics, right, we're not convinced when we walk in the rooms. We need, I don't know, more validation. More people to, just the stubbornness of us when we walk in these rooms is really off the charts. But it mirrors several uh, deep psychological and spiritual processes. In psychology, it aligns with cognitive assessment, schema identification, or Jungian shadow work, or the process of bringing the unconscious patterns into conscious awareness. When you look at it from like trauma theory, well, it's basically functions as a regulatory or regulated exposure in one's own story, right? It allows you to face your past without being overwhelmed by it. In moral injury research, it's the first step towards repair and reintegration. And it's the moment where you begin to reconcile who you were with who you want to actually become. So it's about discovering how, actually, it's not about discovering how broken you are. It's about discovering how your strengths were misused, how your fears were driving the bus, and how addiction distorted the best parts of who you were. So thoroughness is not about shame. It's about clarity, and clarity is the beginning of freedom. And I'm sorry, you guys. I'm just getting over a cold, so if I sniffle here and there, that's on me. And yeah, for me, finally, step 4 became not about beating myself up, and I was so beat up that I was willing to do anything and everything to just crack my own code. And I wanted to finally see what were these patterns that were running my life without my permission. It just, yeah, I had to. And I'm so grateful for that gift of desperation that I finally received. So looking at this from like a multi-traditional comparative lens, right? Like the AANA perspective, for instance, it's the courage step. It's the moment when you stop running from ourselves, when we start to face the truth with honesty and humility. It's a truth-telling step for sure. Um, you finally look at the real causes and conditions of your behavior for the first time. It breaks through denial, projection, minimization, self-deception, and all the defenses in addiction, right? That helps us identify instincts, fears, resentments, and self-centered motives. All those things that shaped our actions for years. And it reveals the patterns they kept repeating in our relationships, our choices, and our emotional reactions. It's the first time people see their life on paper and organized in a way that exposes their underlying story. So it teaches us that courage isn't the absence of fear, but it's you're still willing to look anyway, right? It's the willingness to look honestly despite the fear. And it shows us how our addiction distorted our thinking, exaggerated the hell out of our defects, and it misused our strengths. And it does prepare us for step 5 by helping us to identify the exact nature of our wrongs, not just what we did, but why. And it's the beginning of spiritual surgery, where you open yourself up and you open yourself up for healing and transformation for the first time. So for Christians out there, right, it mirrors the practice of the examination of consciousness. In Psalms, it says, search me, O God, and know my heart. Right? It's not about shame, but it is about alignment. It is about alignment with the Creator, with God Himself. In the Islamic perspective, you got tazkiyah nafs, right, or the purification of self, or muhasaba, which is self-accounting before God. And it is a practice of honesty, humility, and responsibility. From a Buddhist perspective, seeing clearly without attachment, understanding the karmic law of cause and effect, right? Not punishment. It's You're doing an inventory as insight into suffering and its roots. You look at it from a psychological perspective or psychology perspective, right? Identifying maladaptive patterns. You're understanding your triggers, your defenses, and your core beliefs. You're moving from consciousness moving from unconscious behavior to conscious choice. And I'm going to generalize some indigenous perspectives. Right? It mirrors the practice of honest self-examination within a community, and it's often done in talking circles or with an elder or a shaman who helps guide truth telling without judgment. It reflects the beliefs that healing requires restoring balance within oneself, within others, with the land, with the ancestors. And the inventory becomes a way of identifying where somebody has fallen out of alignment with the values such as like respect, humility, courage, and responsibility. It encourages acknowledging not just the harms that you've done, but also the gifts, the strengths, and medicines that have been misused or forgotten. So it's understood as the willingness to face truth so that healing can ripple outward. And it ripples outward from the family to the individual, to the community, and to future generations, really. And from a Stoic perspective, step 4 aligns with just the daily practice of self examination. You review your actions, your motives, and your emotional reactions with honesty and humility. And it's really literally written all over Stoicism, from Seneca to Marcus Aurelius to it emphasizes identifying where one has fallen short of the 4 cardinal values in Stoicism, right? Wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. It teaches that courage is not, it's not just the absence of fear, but the willingness to face the truth and act according to virtue despite all the discomfort. And it becomes a way of separating what's within our control, our choices, our attitudes, our responsibilities, our responses, and from what's not, other people, outcomes, and definitely the past. It encourages recognizing both strengths and defects, understanding that character is shaped through deliberate practice and honest reflection. It's in Stoicism, I guess it would frame step 4 as a disciplined act of moral clarity and a way to realign one's life with reason, integrity, and purpose. And all of this leads us into step 5, which is the release valve, right? And paraphrased, it's admitted to God, higher power, to ourselves, to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. And again, we claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection, right? Steps 4 and 5 are not about perfection, they're just about progress. They're about truth. And when you speak the truth in humility, it is the beginning of freedom. So these steps don't break you, right? They actually unburden you. So 5 is confession, humility, and connection. And let's go back to the old school, man. We're only as sick as our secrets, right? But we do get well in the light, right? Shame dissolves when it is spoken. One of my favorites is like the ego hates step 5. That's how you know it works. Exposure is the antidote to ego. If you want to stay sober, you got to tell on yourself, man. Accountability keeps you honest. And yeah, we confess to heal, not to be punished, right? Liberation, not humiliation. The first time you tell your story, you get your freedom. The second time, you give someone else theirs, right? And it creates connection. It creates the ripple effect of that is just actually still astonishing. And or like a burden shared is a burden half, because dude, fear is a liar with a loud voice, and fear just distorts reality. Yeah, because my best thinking got me here, right? The ego is not a very reliable guide. What else? Oh, another good one is ego stands for edging out God, right? Um, Basically, self will blocks any kind of like spiritual growth. But yeah, these steps don't hurt you. Holding on to your old ideas does, right? Um, yeah, because, dude, honesty and growth, dude, we don't grow when we're comfortable. It's and an inventory pushes you into the truth. And yes, recovery is simple, not easy. The steps are pretty straightforward, but yes, they are emotionally demanding. And yeah, You can't heal what you hide, man. Secrets keep the wound infected. And it's just this vicious cycle that never stops. Um, so, why does step five matter? Again, in my opinion, step four without step five is just self depreciation and self punishment. Step five transforms shame into connection, and it it does activate the neurobiology of relief, right? Narrative disclosure does reduce stress, does reduce cortisol, and it does reduce isolation. And yeah, man, I'll be honest, dude, step five scared me more than step four. Writing it down was one thing. Saying it out loud to another human being felt just impossible. And I got in my own way so many times and past step fours. And, luckily, I survived my relapses where I was willing to tell and talk about everything. But step five is where the rubber basically meets the road. Yeah, because writing an inventory is one thing, and it sucks. Honestly, it is emotionally draining. But saying it out loud to a human being is something else entirely. It asks us again to admit to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. And that means choosing somebody that you trust, a sponsor, a clergy member, a therapist. And I've heard of people, going out of state to a convention and talking to a complete stranger who understands the terrain. And the fellowships, they all emphasize the same truth. Secrecy keeps us sick, and connection is what begins to heal us. And for lots of us, what kept us trapped wasn't just the drinking or the using, it was the ego's terror of exposure, right? That old childhood nightmare of waking up in class, butt naked, and, you're just afraid of being seen, unprotected, and completely humiliated. And yeah, I lived inside that fear for years. I'd, uh, I'd wake up after a binge with that crushing sense of what have I done, sometimes in a hospital with nurses that I've known that have taken care of me a bunch of times, and just, dude, the shame, it was so heavy it felt physical. It wasn't just guilt, right? It was like that psychological weight that just crushed my sense of self. And yeah, research backs this stuff up. Studies on emotional disclosure, they show us that speaking painful or shame laden experiences out loud, especially to somebody that you trust, it reduces stress, it improves mood, and even improves physical health. Neuroscience research shows us that naming our experiences in the presence of another person just reduces activity in the brain's threat centers and increases regulation and relief. So, in other words, what feels like it's going to destroy us is often the very thing that starts to heal us. And I needed someone who could lift me out of that toxic shame long enough for me to look down and see my life through a different lens. Someone who could help me separate who I am from the worst things that I had ever done. And over time, I started to realize that there was more than one way to understand my past, more than one way to skin a cat, I guess, if you want to say it like that. And years later, with some distance and a lot of work, I could finally see just how driven I was by fear, by self-centeredness, by insecurity, and the many faces of ego. And but I could see it with like compassion instead of contempt, because I hated myself. I couldn't stand me at all. I couldn't stand looking at myself in the mirror. And for me, I had to be thoroughly beaten um, by my old way of living before I became willing. And I had to reach a point where I didn't want anything to do with the old version of myself. Like just the ankle weights of guilt, fear, and ego were just too heavy to carry. It was nothing. It was live or die. And that desperation became willingness. And in that same process, yeah, something beautiful actually happened. Somebody actually saw me, right? My sponsors are still my good friends. Those confessions actually ended up becoming connections, and yes, they were scary as hell in the beginning. And those step five conversations like built relationships that have lasted for years, because it really was the first time I got to sit down and just be honest about what was going on, because I was just so sick of repeating the same patterns. And today I could talk about my past in a grounded way. I don't regret it, and I don't want to shut the door on it. Right? I see the value of open, honest dialogue between people who want to grow up. They want to grow up spiritually and emotionally. It's not about humiliation. It's about liberation. It's the moment you stop hiding from yourself and you let someone else witness the truth with you. Uh, and yes, across multiple traditions, right? The Christian perspective. Obviously, they're talking about confession, the process of confession, but not as punishment, but as liberation. Confessing faults is not. It is seen as a path to healing, to reconciliation, to restored relationships, to restored relationship with God Himself. It's the emphasis. It puts the emphasis on grace and humility, and walking in like the newness of life. From an Islamic perspective, confession is ultimately private and between the individual and God, right? And the spirit of step 5 does align with like tawbah, repentance, and muhasabah, right? Self accounting. You can do it with a trusted elder, with a scholar, with an imam, somebody that can help you understand your actions, seek forgiveness, and repair the harm while you preserve your dignity. From a Jewish perspective, right? The tradition of teshuvah, returning or repentance. It's really just translated literally into returning, but it involves acknowledging wrongs and confessing before God, making amends, committing to change, all that good stuff. And speaking the truth out loud is part of returning to integrity in the covenant. From a Buddhist perspective, the practice of confession inside the Sangha, practitioners basically acknowledge unskillful action to restore harmony. And the focus isn't about guilt, but it's about clarity, responsibility, and a recommitment to the Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths. If you want to look at like an earth-based pagan perspective, right? Lots of emphasize ritual truth-telling, releasing what doesn't serve you anymore, and being witnessed by community or your ancestors, and it becomes a rite of release. Speaking what's heavy so that it can be transformed. Um, and like a Native American or that kind of indigenous perspective, talking circles, elder guided circles or conversations, they create space for honest sharing, accountability, and restoration. Being witnessed in truth is part of returning to the right relationships with yourself, with the community, and with the land. And what did I miss? Oh yeah, Stoic, of course. The Stoic perspective. So Stoicism, it does emphasize rigorous self-examination and living in accordance with virtue. So in Stoicism, steps 4 and 5 fit just so incredibly neatly. It's not even funny. I mean, it does in other traditions too, but it aligns with the Stoic practice of reviewing one's actions, acknowledging where you fell short of wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance, and then choosing differently. So speaking it out loud it adds accountability and it adds humility. Yeah, I did a lot of research on this, and I'm going to post a lot of this stuff online for you guys to check out. American Psychological Association, writing about trauma reduces stress, psychiatric treatment, articles from Cambridge.org, all right, about the emotional and physical health benefits of expressive writing. I'm going to post some links to Springer on cultivating self-compassion, psychnet.org, right? It talks about correlation, context, and consequences of honest self-reflection and disclosure, and all kinds of other neat stuff to help, I don't know, shed some more light on this whole process and just hopefully get you to a place where you're comfortable and you have enough trust inside of you to go out and get this done, because it is so important. I appreciate you guys so much for joining me again today, and I hope to see you soon. Oh, and again, if you want to comment, if you want to reach out, Omar at truefreedomproject.com. As a matter of fact, let me know. Let me know what was the hardest part for you. Steps 4 or 5. Did you have any problems confessing certain things? Was it hard for you to find somebody to confess these things to? Anything. I will do my best to get back to you as soon as possible. Lots of love, everybody.